18 missed calls. That was the number that lit up my phone the night my son told me, flat and cold, that I wasn't invited to his Christmas table. I remember looking at the glowing screen and feeling something loosen inside me. Not the soft, forgiving thing I'd expected after years of forgiving, but a fierce, quiet clarity. I put the phone down and smiled in a way that surprised even me. Then I stood, took a coat from the hall, and walked out into the December air with one thought moving through my head like a metronome: enough. My name is Alejandro Cruz. For 40 years I built things for a living. Houses, tile shops, a small contracting business that kept roofs over heads and food on tables. Rosa, my wife, used to call me the sort of man who would give the shirt off his back if anyone asked. She used to laugh when I paid for things the family couldn't afford. She would say, "We're rich in love, Poppy," and we would share a cheap bottle of wine and call it a feast. Rosa died 8 winters ago, and after that my life became a ledger of promises I kept to other people's happiness. The promise to help my son get started. The promise to make sure his first house was perfect. The promise that turned into 5 years of monthly bank transfers that left my own life threadbare. When Mark said the words, "Dad, we don't want you at our house for Christmas," he didn't shout. He broke like thin glass. His voice had the weight of someone apologizing for a thing he believed he had no choice about. "My wife's parents are coming," he said. "They prefer it if you didn't come." The phrase landed in my chest like a pair of cold hands. Prefer it. The words somehow contained 1,000 quiet cruelties. I sat on their worn leather couch, the one with the indentation Rosa used to call the hug seat. The apartment smelled of cloying vanilla candles and new upholstery. Mark's wedding band flashed when he twisted his hands, nervous as a boy asking permission. Claire watched me from across the room in a way that was all practiced politeness and not a grain of warmth. I remembered the first time she met Rosa, how Rosa's eyes lit up at the mention of so-and-so's marmalade or some silly thing, and how, by the second year, she had politely stopped asking after Rosa's health. By the third year she stopped noticing anything but the color of the drapes and whether the linens matched the table's aesthetic. "Where will I spend Christmas?" I asked, because tradition had stitched itself into my bones. Christmas used to be my wife's favorite night of the year. She would roast a turkey until it turned buttery and slice it in thin, sacrificial pieces, insisting we all take seconds. I pictured that kitchen in my head, the way the light would catch the sugar glass jars, the dent in the wooden spoon Rosa had carved early in our marriage. Mark shifted. "Maybe Aunt Rosa," he offered, as if the holiday could be rescheduled like an appointment. "Son," I said, not looking at him. "Tell Claire," I said, "Feliz Navidad." I walked out of their house with the winter air biting my cheeks and a steady sense of purpose warming my chest. The truck started like an old friend greeting me. The streets had their holiday lights, and fathers pushed strollers with toddlers gobsmacked by blinking trees. Briefly, I felt like a ghost walking through a town of happy strangers. But the warmth in me wasn't for them. It was a warmth of something else, the heat that comes when you decide to stop pouring from your cup and refill it for yourself. For years I had been the invisible architect of their comforts. The down payment on their small suburban place came from a takeout of equity from my own house, an equity I had slowly bled into their dream. The monthly transfers were automatic, $2,700 each month, like clockwork, siphoning my savings into their life of granite, pristine appliances, and polished social media posts. There were gifts, emergency funds, a new roof, a dishwasher, everything a modern household could want, and every dollar had come with an apology I never asked for and a humiliation I swallowed. I was the man who paid, and in return I was allowed to appear in holiday pictures. Photos rose and fell in frames where my smile looked smaller with each year. I parked in front of my old bungalow, the one Rosa loved because it had cheap curtains and a kitchen that remembered the smell of garlic from 100 dinners. The porch light blinked, a loose bulb that I'd meant to fix for months but hadn't, because the bills kept finding brighter homes. Inside, the house felt sunnier without the phantom of courtesy hovering by the mantel. I set my briefcase on the table and stared at the envelope with the bank's name stamped in blue. I'd been avoiding it. Avoidance, I had discovered, is an expensive habit. It costs you dignity, time, and sometimes everything you thought you could count on. Claire called as soon as I crossed the threshold. "Alejandro," she said, "I'm so sorry about the misunderstanding." There was that syrupy politeness again, that tone that functions like a blade in polite company. She tried the usual lines. "Parents are sensitive, traditions matter, it's complicated." When she started explaining her parents' standards, the things that make a house acceptable or not, something snapped. Standards, she said. As if standards could be written on a check and mailed, as if they did not have names, faces, or debts behind them. I hung up before the conversation detoured into pleading. I wasn't interested. There's a difference, I thought, between being kind and being used. The night settled around me, and I unfolded a manila folder I'd kept in a pantry shelf for months. Inside were statements, receipts, copies of checks, the ghostly proof of years of generosity. I took a breath, and for the first time in a long while, I felt no shame in looking at the numbers. The shame, I realized, had belonged to the people who expected it shouldering their entitlement around like a mantle. The math was obscene. 5 years of monthly transfers, the down payment, the granite, the appliances, an amount that could have furnished my retirement or fixed the porch roof forever. I'd arranged my life around their wants for so long that my life had been reduced to a series of outgoing transfers. The documents were evidence of my devotion and, by extension, their reliance. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper glow of the lamp revealing the fine print of bank statements, and I made a decision. For once, I'd spend money on the house I loved and the man who still remembered how to dream small. The next morning, I called the bank. The voice on the other end was polite and professional, the kind of voice trained to untangle money from emotion. I need to cancel an automatic transfer, I said. The clerk asked for account numbers, verification details, and soundtracked my life into digits and confirmation tones. Effective immediately, I told her, and she said, done, without the gentleness my heart once expected from strangers when I asked them to cut ties. Walking out of the bank after that call, the winter sun was astonishingly bright, as if the world itself had understood something I hadn't been willing to name, that freedom is sometimes a small administrative click away. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks announced my independence. But it felt seismic. That evening I stacked the statements into a neat pile and carried them to the fireplace. I struck a match with the deliberate slowness of an old ritual, watched paper curl at the edges, and then flare into hungry orange. Smoke rose in slender columns, and for the first time in years the house smelled of something other than compromise. I slept like someone who had stopped carrying a load for other people's appearances. In the morning the phone rang and I ignored it. Claire called first, then Mark, then a number I didn't recognize. A few hours later, when I checked the voicemail, the messages were an orchestrated mix of incredulity and entitlement. We're family. We didn't mean to hurt you. How could you do this? There was also a message from a number marked as a business in town, a curt, professional voice inquiring whether I'd consider the consequences of stopping a long-standing mortgage payment. The world, it seemed, was already adjusting to the new me. I didn't tell anyone about the match in the fireplace or the small, private ceremony of burning what had been transmuted into obligation. Instead, I made a list. Not of revenge so much as of rights I'd been denying myself, a new set of tires for the truck, the porch repaired, a year's worth of groceries without calculating the cost per serving, a visit to Rosa's grave without worrying who needed the change in my pocket. I was astonished at how ordinary these things felt, ordinary like breathing after a week of shallow gulps. The following days were a study in contrasts. People who'd counted on my availability called me with errands that read like tax forms. Claire needed a ride, a payment, a last-minute help. Mark tried to negotiate the way children bargain with parents when they've grown up into needing. Each request sounded like an attempt to treat me as still available, still on call. I met them with a new cadence, measured, unhurried, and firm. No longer felt like an insult. It felt like a boundary. When they pressed, I offered alternatives, a cab fare, directions, a number for a moving service. Practical things. Not charity disguised as family. And then came the outrage. Claire's father, a man whose life had been a collage of club memberships and soft-handed influence, did the thing people like him do when offended. He found channels. A certain local reporter, always hungry for a scandal that scratched at the underside of polite society, received a well-timed call. Within days, the paper printed a story that fit a familiar narrative. Elderly man abandons visiting in-laws at the airport, local hero turned villain. The headline stung like a stone. The article was a cartoon version of events, an outrage without nuance, a morality play trimmed of context. Reading that piece made something icy bloom in my chest. They had stolen the context. They had taken 5 years of quiet sacrifices and turned them into my eccentric decline. They left out the dinners I missed to pay for repairs, the new tires I delayed buying, the hearings with the mortgage officer where I promised the next check and lived to regret it. They left out Rosa's name entirely. The story presented me as a danger to the community, a curmudgeon who'd left innocent visitors in a storm that never existed. The facts were rearranged like ornaments on a mantle to fit a comfortable lie. I could have written a rebuttal. I could have begged to be understood. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and laid out the evidence I'd been building for myself. Receipts, copies of transfers, screenshots of social media posts boasting about expensive weekends and dinners. I printed them on ordinary paper and began to assemble packets. Each packet would tell a different story. The ledger of a father who had paid for a life that never included him as anything but an ATM. The photographic record of a family that celebrated extravagance while blaming the provider when he said no. When I arrived at their house that Christmas Eve, the door was open. The first thing I noticed was how little things looked the way I remembered them. A wreath on the door, candles on the mantel, laughter coming from a room lined with chairs that had once been my help benches. I walked in carrying a leather briefcase thick with truth. People glanced up. The music dropped like a curtain. I set the case down and, with the soft act of someone laying out tools, began to distribute the evidence. There were gasps, a few stammers, an attempted dismissal from a woman who'd built a life around looking unruffled. I told the story in my own voice, not a shout or a demand, but with a plainness that made the lies brittle. I explained how each check traveled from my account into bank accounts of people who had never once written me a birthday card, how every paid bill had been a sacrament for their social life. The room changed like weather in a glass. Faces flushed. Someone asked how much. I named the number. The silence that followed was absolute. I left before the shouting started, and outside in the icy courtyard I felt lighter than I had in a long time. When I drove home that night, the street lamps made the snow look soft as if the city itself had softened its edges for me. I did not know then whether I'd broken my family or simply liberated myself. Maybe both. Either way, for the first time in 5 years, I slept without the weight of other people's expectations folded into my chest like an old quilt. The morning after that Christmas Eve confrontation, Spokane felt strangely quiet, as if the city were holding its breath. Snow drifted down in slow, lazy spirals, dusting the sidewalks like powdered sugar, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel that familiar rush to check my bank balance or scan my voicemail for urgent requests from Mark or Claire. I put on water for coffee, opened the blinds to let the sharp winter sunlight filter in, and settled into a calm that felt both foreign and overdue. My phone, still turned off from the night before, sat on the kitchen counter like a sleeping animal I didn't want to wake. I knew it was full of missed calls and messages, confusion, accusations, perhaps even apologies, but none of it felt urgent. Let them stew. Let them sit with the truth. I'd spent years being available at a moment's notice. They could spend a day or two trying to understand a silence that was finally intentional. I wrapped both hands around my mug, letting the warmth travel through my fingers. It felt good to enjoy something simple without calculating its cost in my head. In the past, each cup of decent coffee meant choosing not to spend that money on something Claire considered essential. New curtains, updated countertops, some holiday decoration she couldn't live without. Now, with those invisible chains cut, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled my kitchen with a sense of ownership I hadn't felt in years. It belonged to me. This moment belonged to me. Around noon, I finally turned on my phone. The vibration nearly slid it across the counter. 31 missed calls. 7 voicemails. A barrage of text messages that filled the screen. Mark had called the most. Claire came second. And then a third cluster of numbers, unknown callers, likely mutual friends or people who'd seen the newspaper article and wanted to weigh in. I didn't listen to any of it. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled past it all and opened the weather app. 40 degrees, light snow, no storm in sight, just as I'd known on that day when they'd fabricated a blizzard for dramatic effect. By mid-afternoon, I got dressed and drove downtown. Not because I needed anything, but because moving my legs felt like reclaiming my independence, one step at a time. The streets were lined with cheerful window displays, paper snowflakes, gold ornaments, knitted scarves draped on mannequins with frozen expressions. Families milled about, arms wrapped in gift bags and laughter. I watched them with a bittersweet ache. I used to imagine Christmas with Mark's children someday, me teaching them how to carve a turkey the way Rosa had taught me, or how to make tamales the way my grandmother had taught her. That dream had quietly dissolved long before last night, but I hadn't wanted to admit it. I wandered into a bookstore, the kind that smelled like paper and warm dust. A young woman behind the counter looked up and smiled, no judgment in her eyes, no expectations attached. I browsed shelves of novels I'd once promised myself I'd read when life was less hectic. I picked up a memoir about rebuilding after loss, ran my thumb over the embossed title, and realized I'd been living in a state of quiet grief since Rosa's passing, grief I'd tried to bury under obligations. "You finding everything okay?" the bookseller asked. I looked up, startled. "Yes," I said. "Actually, I think I am." I bought the book, a small, personal luxury I hadn't allowed myself in years, and slid it into my coat pocket before heading back outside. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my sister, Elena. "Saw the article. Are you okay? Call me." Elena always had a way of reading between the lines. She and Rosa had been close, closer than sisters by blood. They'd cooked together every weekend, gossiping, laughing in the kitchen while I handled the grill. After Rosa passed, Elena checked on me often, but I had pushed her away without realizing it, burying myself in responsibilities that weren't mine. She'd warned me about enabling Mark and Claire's dependence. I had brushed her concerns aside, telling her I knew what I was doing. Now I wished I'd listened. I drove to her house, an old blue Craftsman with a creaking porch and flower pots that stayed full even in winter because she insisted color belonged in every season. She opened the door before I had the chance to knock. "Alejandro," she said softly, pulling me into a hug that thawed something frozen inside me. "Mi hermano. Come in." Her house smelled like sautéed onions and warm tortillas. The scent wrapped around me in a way that felt like home, more home than Mark's house ever had, despite the tens of thousands of dollars I'd poured into it. Elena sat me at the kitchen table, poured coffee into a mug with a chipped rim, and waited until I spoke. "They made me into a monster," I finally said. "I know," she said. "But the people who matter know the truth." I stared at the steam rising from the cup. I didn't expect them to go that far. "People who rely on you too much always panic when you stop carrying them," she replied. "But last night, what you did, it was brave." "I didn't feel brave," I admitted. "I felt tired." "Tired is what happens right before brave," she said, patting my hand. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything, the years of payments, the insults disguised as jokes, the night Claire implied Rosa hadn't belonged in certain rooms. Elena's face tightened with each new revelation. "That woman," she muttered under her breath. "Dios mío, if Rosa were alive, she'd haunt them." I laughed for the first time in days. A real laugh, not the tired chuckle I reserved for polite company. Elena leaned back. "So what now?" "I don't know," I said. "I feel like I closed one chapter and opened a blank page." "Then start writing something worth reading," she said. I drove home as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in bruised purples and soft oranges. The world felt strangely vast, as if I'd stepped into a version of my life where my time and energy weren't demanded like tithes. That evening, I made myself dinner, steak seasoned with garlic and pepper, roasted potatoes, steamed greens. A whole meal meant for one. I lit a candle for Rosa, the way I sometimes did on nights when the quiet felt too heavy. And then I opened the book I'd bought and read the first chapter aloud, imagining her curled beside me on the couch, laughing at the parts she found silly and wiping her eyes at the tender moments. Later, when the phone rang again, I let it go to voicemail. This piece was new. Delicate. Something to be protected. The next day, the backlash from the Christmas dinner explosion began. One of Claire's friends, someone I vaguely remembered from a fundraiser years ago, messaged me on Facebook. Her note was short. "I was there last night. You deserved to be heard. They've been lying to a lot of people." Soon more trickled in, neighbors, acquaintances, people from church who'd seen the article but now understood the truth. A few apologized for believing the newspaper version. A few admitted they'd always suspected something off about Claire's family. Each message felt like a small victory, a quiet correction to a public wrong. But not everyone was so gracious. 3 days later, I received a letter from a lawyer, Cody Jenkins's lawyer. The tone was predictably aggressive, accusations of defamation, threats of lawsuits, demands for retractions. I read it once, twice, then placed it in a drawer with a sigh. They were doubling down. People like Cody always did. They built their entire existence on being untouchable, and the moment someone exposed the cracks, they scrambled to plaster over them with legal threats and intimidation. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had nothing left to lose. Not reputation, not money, not family bonds that were never real. The morning after receiving the letter, I met with my own attorney, a quiet man named Vargas who'd handled my business contracts for years. He read Cody's letter, snorted once in amusement, and leaned back in his chair. "They don't have a case," he said. "Everything you shared was factual. You have receipts, dates, bank records. If they push this, they'll bury themselves." "What should I do?" I asked. "Nothing," he replied. "Let them exhaust themselves. People like this run out of steam when their threats don't land." I nodded slowly. The idea of doing nothing felt strange, unfamiliar even, but also liberating. I had spent so long carrying the weight of other people's expectations that releasing responsibility felt like learning to breathe again. That afternoon, as I stepped out of Vargas's office, the cold air stung my face in a way that felt refreshing. I lit a cigarette, my first in over a year, and watched the smoke drift upward like a small prayer. I shouldn't have smoked it, but in that moment, it felt like reclaiming one more small freedom. When I returned home, I saw a car parked at the curb. Mark's car. He was sitting on my porch steps, knees tucked, hands folded like a man waiting for a verdict. When he looked up, his face was softer than I'd ever seen it, eyes rimmed red, jaw unshaven, hair mussed like he hadn't slept. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we talk?" The last time he'd sat on that porch was years ago, before Claire's influence had woven itself so tightly around his life that even simple gestures felt filtered through her approval. Seeing him there now, hunched and defeated, made the winter air feel heavier. His breath puffed out in uneven bursts, little clouds dissolving before they reached the railing. I stood at the edge of the steps, not moving closer. "You look cold," I said. "I've been here an hour," he answered, rubbing his hands together. "Didn't know when you'd be back. Did you try calling?" He cracked a humorless smile. "You turned your phone off. Maybe I didn't want to be reached." He nodded slowly, accepting it, then looked toward the street as if searching for the right words there. "Dad, I messed up. Badly." His voice broke a little on the last word. "Can we go inside? Please." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to hear him, but because I needed to enter that conversation as a man with boundaries, not the man I had been for 5 years, easy to sway, eager to fix, always ready to soften at the slightest apology. Finally, I opened the door. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and the lemon soap I'd used earlier. Mark stepped into the living room, hovering near the door like he was afraid he wasn't welcome beyond the rug. "You can sit," I said, gesturing to the couch. He sat slowly, shoulders folding in on themselves. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. The house settled. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, a car drove by, the world moving as though my son and I weren't sitting inside the fragile silence of something breaking and maybe, just maybe, trying to mend. "I don't know where to start," he finally whispered. "Start with honesty," I said. He inhaled shakily, rubbing his palms against his knees. "The night of the dinner, when you left, everything fell apart after you walked out. You heard the yelling, right?" I nodded. "I imagined it." "It wasn't yelling," he said, shaking his head. "It was a damn hurricane. Claire was crying, her parents were furious, my friends were asking questions I didn't know how to answer." He paused. "Dad, I didn't know you'd paid for all of that. For the house. For the kitchen. For so many things." "Maybe you didn't want to know," I said gently. He swallowed. "Maybe. But seeing the papers on that table, seeing everyone reading the truth, I was ashamed." "Of me?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "Of myself. Of how blind I've been. Of how much I let them control my life. And of how little I protected you." He looked up, and his eyes shone with a raw sorrow I wasn't used to seeing. Mark had always been the kind of person who hid behind practicality, logic, financial plans, future goals, the safe things that didn't require emotional exposure. But this version of him, he looked stripped down, almost young again. "You didn't deserve any of it," he said. "Not the article. Not the accusations. Not the way Claire's parents talked to you. Not the way I let it happen. Let it. I lifted an eyebrow. Or helped it." He winced. "Both." A gust of wind rattled the porch windows. The house seemed to lean in, listening. "Dad," he continued softly, "after you left that night, her parents called me irresponsible. Said I'd ruined Christmas. Said I was letting my blue-collar roots embarrass the family. They even insulted Mom." His jaw tightened. "I never knew what they'd said about her before. Claire always softened it or changed the subject." He paused. "That night, I heard everything clearly." "And what did you do?" I asked. "I defended her," he said. "For the first time. And they didn't expect that. Claire's father told me I should be grateful they elevated my life. That without Claire's family, I'd still be installing tiles and driving an old truck." "And what did you say?" "That the only reason I had a house was because of you." He looked down. He didn't like that. I exhaled slowly. "I imagine he didn't." "He called you unstable," Mark whispered. "Said you were dramatic. Said men like you manipulated people with guilt and money." He stared at the floor. "And I didn't believe him. For once, I didn't doubt you." That sentence landed deeper than he probably realized. He continued, "After the dinner, Claire's parents left early. They were furious. Claire cried all night. And I just sat there, realizing how far I drifted. From who I was. From you. From Mom. From everything." He looked up again. "That night I knew something had to change." "Has it?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I moved out." I blinked. "What?" "3 days ago." "Where are you staying?" "With a coworker for now. I don't know if Claire and I are done, but I needed space. I needed to think without her parents breathing down my neck." I studied him. There was a tremor in his hands, but a steadiness in his gaze. "I'm not asking for money," he added quickly. "Or help. I'm just asking if there's still room for me in your life. Even after everything." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood and walked to the kitchen. I poured 2 cups of coffee, the simple act giving me time to breathe. When I returned, Mark accepted the cup with both hands like a person receiving something fragile. "For 5 years," I said slowly, "I let myself believe that giving you money was the same as giving you love. I thought I was helping you build a life. But the truth is, I was replacing something I didn't know how to fix." "What do you mean?" "After your mother died, I didn't know how to be a father and a grieving husband at the same time. I tried to fill the silence with generosity. I thought if I gave enough, cared enough, paid for enough, maybe I wouldn't lose you too." His eyes softened. "Dad." "But that wasn't love," I said. "It was fear. And fear lets people take advantage of you." I paused. "Even the ones you love." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." "I'm glad," I said. "But understanding doesn't erase what happened." "I'm not asking you to erase it," he said. "I just want a chance to fix things. To get to know you again. Without all the noise." We sat in silence, drinking our coffee, letting the warmth settle between us. Eventually, he stood. "I should go," he said. "I don't want to overwhelm you." "You didn't overwhelm me," I replied. "But you're right. It's a start, not a finish." He nodded, then hesitated. "Can I come by again? Maybe this weekend?" "Yes," I said. "But next time, knock like you live in the world, not like you're afraid of it." A small smile broke through his exhaustion. "Okay." As he stepped outside, the cold wind caught his coat. He paused on the porch, turning back. "Dad." "Yes." "I'm proud of you. For standing up to them." I felt something warm press against the inside of my chest. I didn't show it, but I felt it. "Good," I said. "Because I'm starting to be proud of myself too." He nodded once and walked to his car. I watched him drive off, the taillights glowing like twin embers fading down the street. When his car disappeared around the corner, I closed the door and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. For the first time since Rosa died, my house felt full again. Not with people, but with possibility. I stood in the living room, took in the warmth of the lamp glow, the quiet hum of the heater, the soft echo of my son calling me Dad, without wanting something attached. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, expecting maybe Mark again. Instead, the message on the screen stopped me cold. It was from Claire. "We need to talk. It's urgent. It's about the house." I stared at the message longer than I should have. The words felt rehearsed, vaguely dramatic, and exactly like the kind of sentence she would send when she wasn't in control of a situation. I set the phone down without replying. Let it sit. Let her wait. 5 years of her urgency had turned my life into a revolving door of obligations. I wasn't about to let her yank me by the collar again. A minute later, another message popped up. "Please. I'm not trying to fight. But we're in serious trouble. Call me." Trouble. Of course they were. The mortgage notice was probably breathing fire down their throats by now. 3 months of no payments, a household built on appearances, and a lifestyle financed by someone who finally woke up. Anyone would panic. But what surprised me wasn't the crisis. It was the tone. There was no snobbery in her text. No superiority. Only a hint of fear. Fear made even the proudest people sound human. Still, I didn't call her. Instead, I made myself a sandwich, turned on the radio, and let the soft hum of some old Sinatra tune fill the house. The day unfolded quietly. Mild chores, a warm shower, a nap that felt like a luxury I hadn't allowed myself in years. When the sun dipped below the horizon and the house fell into a soft golden glow, I finally picked up the phone and called her. She answered before the first ring finished. "Alejandro." "Yes." "Oh, thank God." Her voice trembled, something I'd never heard from her. "We're in a mess. A real one." I didn't respond. Silence was a language with Claire, one she always rushed to fill. "The bank sent a final notice," she continued. "They said if we don't pay the arrears in 10 days, they'll start foreclosure." 10 days, Alejandro. She swallowed audibly. "They're serious." "They usually are," I said calmly. "You can't let this happen," she snapped, slipping back into her familiar tone for a moment before catching herself. "I mean, we can't let this happen. Mark is falling apart. I'm trying to handle everything, but it's too much." I leaned back in the chair. "You said I wasn't welcome in your house anymore. Why is it suddenly my responsibility again?" There was a pause, then a forced steadiness. "Because you helped build this life. You know you did." "I did," I admitted. "But that doesn't mean I owe you the rest of my life." Her breath hitched. "Please. Please just meet me. I can explain everything." Explain everything. That was rich. She'd spent 5 years explaining nothing. Why I was left out of holidays, why I wasn't good enough for her parents, why my culture was something to hide behind the curtain when guests came over. She'd explained nothing but expected everything. "Where?" "Your place," she blurted, then corrected herself. "I mean, anywhere you want. Just soon. Please." For reasons I couldn't fully articulate, I agreed to meet her the next morning at a cafe downtown. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Maybe I wanted to see if she'd finally dropped the mask she'd worn since stepping into Mark's life. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. The windows fogged from the cold outside, soft jazz humming through overhead speakers. Claire was already there, sitting in a corner booth, hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She looked smaller somehow, eyes rimmed with stress, hair pulled back like she'd given up trying to impress anyone. When I sat down, she didn't smile. Instead, she said, "I'm sorry." 2 words. Simple. Unexpected. And for the first time since I'd known her, they sounded real. "You don't owe me anything," I said cautiously. "No," she said. "But I owe the truth." She swallowed and began talking before I could stop her. Everything fell apart after that night. My parents blamed me. Said I embarrassed them. Said I'd ruined their social standing. Her fingers trembled around the mug. "They haven't spoken to me since." "That's unfortunate," I said evenly, though inside part of me thought it wasn't unfortunate at all. It was overdue. I deserved some of what happened, she admitted. I've been difficult. I know that. But I never meant to hurt you the way I did. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to see where this sudden honesty would take her. She continued, when Mark and I got married, my parents told me that if I wanted to fit into their world, I had to leave behind anything that didn't match. They said image mattered more than truth. Her voice tightened. And I listened. I shouldn't have. But I did. I pushed you out because they told me it was the right thing for Mark's career. For our future. For appearances. The word hung between us like a bitter scent. I'm not excusing it, she added. I'm just explaining what I let happen. I sighed. Claire, if you'd been honest years ago, we could have had a relationship. But instead, you let your parents treat me like... I know, she whispered. And it got worse. You know the article. My jaw clenched. Yes. It wasn't my idea. She exhaled shakily. It was my father's. He said tarnishing your reputation would make you fall in line. Said men like you respond to pressure. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Men like me. She nodded miserably. I tried to stop him. But once he gets something in his head, he becomes unstoppable. And you didn't warn me? I was scared, she admitted. Not of him. Of losing everything he promised us. Connections, social circles, favors, our place in their world. I leaned back slowly. And now that you've lost those things, you want me to fix what's left. It's not like that, she said quickly, eyes watering. I'm begging you. Not for me. For Mark. He's broken. Alejandro. He moved out because he finally realized how much he failed you. He wakes up crying. He barely eats. He keeps saying he wants to make things right, but doesn't know how. My chest tightened despite myself. He loves you, she whispered. He always has. But my parents twisted everything. They made him believe he had to choose between us and you. And he chose wrong. Yes, she said softly. But he's choosing again. I stared at her for a long moment. The cafe noise faded. The world felt suspended, waiting for something. Finally, I asked, what exactly do you want from me? She blinked rapidly. A chance. Just a chance. Help us get through this so we can rebuild everything the right way. Together. As a family. Family. She said it like it was a promise, not something she'd shredded for years. I'm not paying your mortgage again, I said firmly. I know, she whispered. I'm not asking that. What are you asking? She hesitated. Talk to the bank with us. Show them the history. The support you gave. Explain how the misunderstanding happened. If they hear it from you, they might give us more time to catch up. A payment plan. A delay. Something. I let out a slow breath. Claire, the bank doesn't care about stories. They care about numbers. Then help us one last time, she said. Not with money. With credibility. With guidance. Guidance. A word I'd waited years to hear from them. But before I could respond, the cafe door opened, and cold air swept in, carrying something unexpected with it. Mark. He stood there holding a folder, thick, stuffed, familiar. My folder. The one I'd used to expose everything at Christmas. The one he must have taken during the chaos. He walked toward us, placed the folder gently on the table, and said, Dad, don't help us. Claire whipped her head toward him. Mark. No, he said, quiet but steady. Not this time. He pulled out a chair and sat down. His hands shook slightly as he opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, canceled checks, photos, everything. We made this mess, he said. You didn't. And if we're going to fix it, we need to do it without leaning on you anymore. Claire stared at him like she didn't recognize him. We can't lose the house. Maybe we should, he said softly. Maybe we'll finally learn something. He turned to me. Dad, I want to fix things with you. But I don't want it to be built on you rescuing us. Not again. My throat tightened. Claire whispered, But where will we go? Mark took her hand gently, something he hadn't done in a long time. Wherever we can afford. Wherever we start over. He looked at me again. This time, he said, we carry ourselves. For the first time, I saw not the boy I'd raised, not the man shaped by Claire's parents, but someone emerging from both shadows. He exhaled, then added, Dad, can you forgive me, even if I don't ask you for anything? I leaned back, overwhelmed in a way words couldn't describe. The answer rose in me not from anger, not from pride, but from a place deeper than either. Yes, I whispered. I can. Claire covered her face and began to cry. Not manipulative tears, not staged ones, but a woman realizing the world she clung to was cracking beyond repair. The folder lay open between us, exposing 5 years of truth. Mark closed it with a soft thud. Then let's go home, he said. Not to me, not to her, but to the future they would now have to navigate without leaning on my back. I watched them walk out of the cafe together, still uncertain, still fragile, but finally honest. And as they left, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace that comes from keeping the family afloat. The peace that comes from letting go. Peace didn't settle in all at once. It came in waves, small ones that lapped softly against the edges of my life. After the cafe meeting, after watching Mark and Claire walk out together with uncertainty pressed into their steps, I went home and sat in the quiet, letting the stillness sink into the walls. My house had never felt so solid beneath my feet. Every creak, every soft hum of the heater, every familiar shadow belonged to me again. No ghosts, no obligations, no reminders of money siphoned into a life that wasn't mine. That night, I read until I fell asleep in my recliner, the book slipping from my hands and landing on the floor with a soft thud. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking to the invisible weight of responsibility tightening around my chest. When morning came, I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the snow melt into patches of slush on the sidewalk. A few neighbors were out early, shoveling or brushing snow off their cars. It was an ordinary day, but it felt new. Around noon, a knock sounded at my door. Soft, almost hesitant. When I opened it, I found Elena standing there, bundled in her mustard-colored coat, her hair tucked under a knitted cap. "You didn't call me last night," she said. "Was I supposed to?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She lifted an eyebrow. "I heard from Rosa's friend, Anna. She saw Mark and Claire leaving the cafe with swollen faces. Word traveled fast in Spokane. It always did. They talked," I said simply. And I think Mark is finally ready to be a man." Elena's shoulders softened. "That must feel strange." "It does," I admitted. "Good strange. Unfamiliar strange." She stepped inside, brushing snow off her sleeves. Did Claire do her dramatics? She always had a flair for exaggerating a crisis. "This time it wasn't drama," I said. "It was fear. Fear of losing Mark." "No," I said. "Fear of losing everything she couldn't afford in the first place." Elena nodded with a low hum, moving toward the kitchen. She knew the house as well as I did, pulling mugs from the cupboard, filling the kettle. "So," she said, setting the kettle on the stove, "what now?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I keep living. I keep breathing. I keep choosing myself." "Good," she said. "You deserve that." As she poured boiling water over the tea leaves, she asked, "Do you think they'll lose the house?" "Probably." "And will you save them?" "No." She studied me for a moment. Not judgmental, just checking for cracks. "I'm proud of you." "I think I'm finally proud of myself," I said quietly. She handed me a cup of tea and we sat at the table, letting the steam twirl between us like a gentle sigh. We talked about mundane things, her garden, my projects, the way the city looked different in winter. But beneath all of it was something else, the sense that the crisis that had shaped my life for so long was finally dissolving. 2 days later, a letter came in the mail. A plain white envelope. My name printed in neat handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a note, short and trembling at the edges. "Alejandro, thank you for meeting me. I know I can't undo the harm I caused. I just want you to know I'm trying to change. Whatever happens to the house, whatever happens to us, I hope someday I can earn your forgiveness. Not because I deserve it, but because you're the only real family Mark has. I'm sorry, Claire. I read it twice, surprised by the sincerity in her words. I wasn't ready to trust her, but I appreciated the humility. I tucked the letter into a drawer, not to keep as a sentimental relic, but because its existence marked the strangest shift of all. Claire had finally recognized her own part in everything. That alone was unexpected. Later that afternoon, I drove to the hardware store. The porch light still needed fixing, and the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom had grown into a steady drip that sang at night. I moved through the aisles slowly, choosing tools, brass fittings, new bulbs. Simple tasks. Simple pleasures. When I reached the paint section, I stopped. It had been years since I'd painted anything in the house. The walls had dulled into a dingy beige, the color Rosa had chosen back when we were young and newly married. I ran my hand over the paint swatches, imagining the house reborn in a fresh hue. Thinking of remodeling? A worker asked, stocking brushes nearby. Thinking of starting over, I said. Good time for it, he said, and handed me a soft blue-gray card. This one's real peaceful. I took it as a sign. A small sign, maybe. But signs don't have to be loud. Back at home, I set the paint card on the mantel. I'd decide later. A week passed. Mark texted me twice. Short messages letting me know he was staying with his coworker, that he'd spoken with Claire about their next steps, that he was applying for a job that paid better but required training he'd neglected for years. He didn't ask for anything. That alone was a miracle. Then, one night, close to 10 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mark. I answered on the second ring. Everything okay? His voice shook. Dad, they gave us the date. For the foreclosure. He exhaled sharply. Yeah. They scheduled the hearing for next month. He paused. But I'm not calling about that. What is it? We're moving out. Claire and I packed the last of our things today. We're giving the keys back tomorrow. I waited. It feels like failure, he whispered. It feels like truth, I corrected softly. He let out a breath somewhere between a sob and relief. Dad, can we come by? Not to stay. Just to talk. For years, I'd wished for this version of my son, the one who came without expecting anything but presents. Yes, I said. Come. 30 minutes later, they arrived. Claire stood beside Mark on my porch, her eyes tired but clear. No makeup. No polished perfection. Just a woman who had finally scraped against the raw edges of consequence. Inside, Mark sank onto the couch while Claire lingered near the doorway, unsure if she should sit. You can sit, I said. It's not a courtroom. She managed a small smile and joined Mark. For a long moment none of us spoke. Finally, Mark said, We lost the house. I know, I replied. We've been living in a bubble, he continued, voice steadying. A nice bubble. But it wasn't real. Claire spoke next. Your son has been strong. Stronger than I expected. Mark squeezed her hand gently. Because you've finally been honest with me. She looked ashamed. I should have been honest years ago. And I should have listened, he said. They turned to me. We want to start over, Mark said. Not with your money. Not with guilt. With discipline. With work. With honesty. And with you in our lives, if you'll have us. Claire nodded earnestly. We want to invite you to every holiday from now on. Every birthday. Every dinner we can afford, even if it's just spaghetti and canned sauce. Her voice cracked. And if you choose not to come, we'll respect it. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, feeling the weight of their sincerity settle around us like a warm blanket. You made mistakes, I said. Big ones. But so did I. I enabled too much for too long. I tried to buy closeness instead of building it. Mark's voice was a whisper. So, what now? Now, I said, you build your life the right way. And you let me be a part of it. Not as a bank, not as a background character, not as someone to be hidden, but as your father. They exchanged a relieved, fragile look. Claire wiped her eyes. Thank you. Mark sat up. We're renting a small place on Maple Hill. 2 bedrooms. Old appliances. Carpet that's older than I am." He laughed softly. "It's not glamorous. But it's ours. For real this time." "Good," I said. "And we want you to come see it," he added shyly. "When it's ready." "I will," I said. "Gladly." They stayed another hour, talking about humble plans, budget grocery lists, new job interviews, therapy sessions they'd started together. They were rebuilding from the ground up. For the first time, it wasn't built on my money. It was built on honesty. When they left, I stood at the door watching their car pull away. The feeling inside me wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was pride. Not pride in myself, though there was some of that. Pride in them. What a strange, unexpected gift. That night, I walked to the mantel, picked up the soft blue-gray paint card, and finally made my decision. Tomorrow, I'd start repainting. A new beginning for all of us. The next morning, a pale wash of sunlight spread across my living room floor, soft and quiet like a blessing. I woke up earlier than usual, the way I used to when Rosa and I would plan weekend projects. Small renovations, garden work, repainting the fence just for the joy of doing something together. There was always music in the background then, usually her old records spinning soft melodies that carried through every room. I hadn't played those records in years. But that morning felt different. Felt like a beginning. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, opened every window to let the crisp air slide through, and laid out the paint supplies I'd bought. The brushes, rollers, trays, drop cloths, painter's tape. Then I set the small square of blue-gray paint on the coffee table, the color that had somehow whispered peace to me in the hardware store aisle. "All right," I said to myself quietly. "Let's see what you can become." Painting a house alone is a meditative thing. The repetitive motion, the sweep of the roller, the way new color spreads like a tide over old walls, it forces you to be present. Every stroke felt like shedding something: guilt, obligation, regret. I took my time, moving slowly around the room, careful not to rush. It wasn't just paint. It was reclamation. Rosa would have laughed at my technique and insisted on taking the roller from me, saying I was missing spots. I smiled at the memory and kept going. By noon, I'd finished the first coat. Blue-gray washed over everything, subtle, calming, soft as early morning fog. I stepped back, chest swelling with something like pride. My house didn't feel like a vessel for sacrifice anymore. It felt like mine again, fully, unapologetically mine. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Elena. "Lunch? I'm bringing caldo if you say yes." I typed back, "Always yes to caldo." "Good," she replied. "I'll be there in 30. Don't make coffee. My thermos is full." I chuckled and wiped a streak of paint from my wrist before heading to the bathroom to wash up. The mirror reflected a man who looked lighter somehow. Less weighed down. Almost younger. Painting does things to a man. Forces clarity, forces breath. When Elena arrived, she stepped inside and whistled. "Ay, hermano. This looks beautiful." "You think so?" "I know so," she said, setting the steaming pot of caldo on the table. "The color suits you." We ate together in the quiet, the kind of companionable silence that only exists with someone who has known you through every season of your life. She asked about Mark. I told her the truth, that he was trying, truly trying. She nodded thoughtfully, not offering praise or criticism, just understanding. "You did what you needed to do," she said finally. "And now he's doing what he needs to do." It was simple, honest, perfect. After she left, I returned to the living room to start the second coat. That's when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands again, more out of habit than necessity, and opened the door. But it wasn't Elena. And it wasn't Mark or Claire. It was someone I hadn't expected to see at my doorstep ever again. Cody Jenkins. His hair was combed, his coat expensive, his shoes polished. But beneath the curated exterior, cracks spidered through his features, tension around his mouth, exhaustion under his eyes. Arrogance deflated. "Mr. Cruz," he said stiffly. I crossed my arms. "What do you want, Cody?" "I came to talk," he said. "If you have a minute." "I don't," I answered immediately. But you can say what you need to say from there. For the first time since I'd known him, Cody looked human. Uncertain. He swallowed, glanced back at his BMW parked at the curb, then returned his gaze to me. I wanted to apologize, he said. The words hit my ears like something from another language. Excuse me. He cleared his throat. An apology. For the article. For the comments. For everything. He shifted awkwardly. I may have acted out of anger. And pride. And perhaps a bit of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I said slowly, arching an eyebrow. His face flushed. Fine. I acted like a jackass. There it is, I said. Much better. He sighed, long, defeated. My wife hasn't left the house in weeks. Our friends, well, you know how people are. They read. They talk. They judge. And you were worried about your reputation, I said knowingly. Yes, he admitted. It's taken a hit. Actions have consequences, I said, echoing his own words from that terrible night on my porch. He winced at the reminder. Fair enough. And what exactly do you want from me? I asked. A rebuttal? A character statement? A letter to the editor? No, he said quickly, shaking his head. Nothing like that. I'm not asking you to fix anything. He let out a breath. Claire told me what happened. About the mortgage. About everything you did for them. I didn't know. I should have known, but I didn't. I waited. I just wanted you to hear it from me. I'm sorry, he said again. Truly. I studied him carefully, not because I doubted the words, but because I wanted to understand whether they came from his mouth or his pride. His posture answered for him. Shoulders low. Eyes tired. Voice stripped of superiority. Thank you, I said finally. But there's nothing between us to repair. He nodded. I know. Phil. I wanted to say it. I stepped back. Have a good day, Cody. He hesitated as if wanting to say more, but thought better of it. Good day, he said, turning and heading back to his car. The engine started, then faded into the distance. I closed the door slowly, breathing deeply, letting the moment settle. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. Not victory. Not revenge fulfilled. It was closure. True closure. The kind that arrives only when someone who wronged you realizes their reflection isn't as clean as they once thought. I returned to the room, dipped the roller in the paint tray, and resumed the strokes. Smooth. Consistent. Soothing. A couple of hours later, just as I was beginning to clean up, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark. Can we take you to dinner tomorrow? Nothing fancy. Just tacos at the corner place you love. I smiled. Big. Genuine. Yes, I typed back. I'd love that. The next day, the three of us squeezed into a booth at the little Mexican place off Garland Avenue, the one with plastic tablecloths and salsa so spicy it made your eyes water. It was the first time in years we'd shared a meal without pretense, without tension buzzing under the surface, without Claire glancing at her phone to see who was watching. She laughed. Mark relaxed. We talked about simple things, the weather, new job prospects, favorite movies, where they planned to live next. There were no big speeches, no dramatic revelations. Just life. Ordinary and extraordinary at once. As we walked to the parking lot after dinner, snow began to fall again, soft flakes catching the glow of the street lamps. Dad, Mark said quietly, thank you for giving us another chance. This time, Claire added, we won't waste it. I believed them. That night, when I got home, I stood in my newly painted living room, breathing in the scent of fresh beginnings. For so long, I believed my life was shrinking, contracting into the narrow space between expectations and disappointments. But now, with the simple act of saying no, of stepping back, of choosing myself, I discovered that life can open again. It can expand. It can grow. I turned off the lights and looked one last time at the blue-gray walls glowing in the moonlight. They looked like a promise. A quiet one, but a promise nonetheless. Tomorrow, I'd invite Elena over for dinner. Maybe I'd start a garden in the spring. Maybe I'd join the Saturday morning walking group I always saw at the park. Maybe I'd take a trip somewhere warm. Maybe I'd live Fully, not halfway. For now, though, I simply whispered into the stillness. Merry Christmas, Rosa. I finally found my way back. And I had. Not by giving. Not by losing. But by choosing. And for the first time in years, I belonged to myself.